Infrastructure. It's a simple thing, right? Here I'm talking workspaces. Shelves, storage, the framework of our working and creative environment. It's important, and I'm not sure if we think about it a lot. When I'm doing electronic music, it's super important to think about. You want a nice environment for creativity with low friction, and want your tools at your fingertips. So let me tell you a story. Last year, I expanded my music workspace to Synth Stand. For the majority of that time, it's hosted my Eurorack rig, a desktop synth, and it's otherwise been a wide open, flat surface. The type of surface that's great at gathering a mess of junk. And since getting the synth desk, I've had a bookcase nearby where I've been storing the majority of my other synths and gear. You can see where this is going, right? If I want to use any of that other gear, I now need to take some time to clear off the space, wire it up, and get going. A ton of friction if I just want to play around and get some ideas down. Which of course meant that gear just basically gathered dust and I'd rarely pull any of it out and use it. Every time the mood struck, the thought of untangling cables and reorganizing my entire desk just sent me back to the computer. This year, call it a resolution if you want, I decided I'd like to find interesting new ways to use my hardware and get into different genres and generally vary things up. So a couple of weeks ago, I got this brainworm. It burrowed in and wouldn't leave, metaphorically speaking, that is. I got to thinking I should build a stand. Sure, I could buy something, like a nice Jasper's rack, but I really didn't want to spend much money on this project, or any if I could help it. So my first thought was to get my 3D printer going again and design and print a stand from scratch. Strength and stability was a concern here, of course. This stand would have to be pretty wide, at least 2 feet, so I ended up learning a lot about different techniques to produce strong, wide prints. It turns out there's been quite a resurgence of ancient woodworking techniques, from interesting dovetail designs to crafty Japanese-inspired joints. Ones that were incredibly strong when built with wood and similarly strong when printed out of plastic. The downside to 3D printing, obviously, is the time cost. Even after factoring out the time to design the unit, it would likely take days to print all the pieces and then reprint all the parts that didn't quite work the first time. But don't get me wrong, I'm still interested in going the printed route, and I may revisit it at some other time. I want to get some shelves together and get back to music. So, poking around our garage, I found some scrap plywood that looked about the right size, and I thought a couple hours of work to build something was a much better proposition. So I fired up Onshape to get my vision together and generate some measurements. For a synth stand, the angle of the shelves is a pretty important dimension, so you can see what's going on and make good use of the space. I also wanted it to fit well with the dimensions of the Eurorack case I already had on desk. And I definitely didn't want squared off sides, so I ended up with a nice tapered look where the shelves can align to that taper and everything can be nicely accessible. Ideally, there'd be some nice rounded edges and filleted corners, but for now we'll probably just live with sanded smooth edges. After all, using a router on half-inch plywood might be a recipe for disaster. The design came together pretty quickly, that is on top of learning how to use Onshape. Defining angles took a little bit to figure out, but it ended up overall with a pleasing and simple design. And then we get to construction time. I'm so glad we have a table saw. It made short work of getting all the parts, even the tapers on the end piecers. This was also about the time I'd miscalculated a little and the sheet of plywood I'd found wouldn't actually produce the dimensions I originally wanted. The shelves are a couple inches shorter than I intended and about an inch narrower, but I think it'll work out. I also hadn't thought through how exactly the shelves would connect to the end pieces. I currently have some screws going straight into the end grain and I only busted a couple plies. I think ideally I'd have some brackets so screws can always go into the stronger faces of the wood. maybe that's a future job for the 3D printer. But either way, after a couple hours, with sawdust everywhere and a few choice words muttered over those missed measurements, there it was, my custom-built studio stand. So there it is. I'm calling it a prototype, but you know what they say. This thing probably won't be going anywhere anytime soon. If it's lucky, it'll get a lick of paint or some stain. So now I have a home for some synths, things I can keep plugged in, and be ready to go at any time. I still have the bookshelf, with a few things that don't quite fit, but with a dedicated place that won't get quite so messy, I can much more easily move things around as needs arise. And what improvements would I make next time? Well, I already made sure that the lower shelf was about 1 inch off the table, so I could get cables and whatnot through. But I actually have margin to have it go up higher, so maybe I could fit a patch bay or an audio interface down there as well. I also need to stiffen it up horizontally. It's sturdy enough, but I'd like a little more strength. It'll definitely wobble if I push it around too much, and I can probably fit some wide bars behind the shelves to keep them hidden. And like I said, due to the scrap plywood I had on hand, the shelves are a tad shallow. At 6 inches, it's deep enough for the electrons and the virus, but something a little deeper, like the Microfreak, is a little precarious on there. And a little extra width would be nice too. Maybe some lighting. But right now, this shelf means I can, and have been, playing around with more hardware. I've already posted a couple videos using the new arrangement, and it's been a lot of fun finally incorporating multiple synths at the same time, and even experimenting a little with sampling between them. Also, so far, the Zoom Live Track has been acting as the main mixer on the synth desk, with it sending audio out to my computer. It's definitely become a fast favorite for mixing and recording. So now my personal infrastructure has considerably improved. A bit of old plywood, now assembled at a few right angles with a little bit of design thought, has transformed my environment from one full of friction and arduous ritual into one where I can very quickly be creative, with all my tools always at my fingertips. Infrastructure isn't always about storage or organization. Here, it's creating a space where inspiration can be captured when it strikes. But now, if you'll excuse me, I've got some music to attend to. Cheers.